Well, hi, Michael. Nice to sit down and chat to you today. Maybe just to start with, maybe just introduce yourself a little bit, your role in your organization, and we go from there.
Sure, glad to be here. Michael Latsko, I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Arizona State University near Phoenix, Arizona.
Fantastic. So one of the things that's really interesting that you've been working on is this AI Capstone project, I think is what it's called. Can you provide some insight as to what it is? And I think, as I understand, it's focused on the talent lifecycle, especially recruiting and succession plan.
Yeah, so there are actually two capstones, so I'm going to talk about one of them, the succession planning piece, but there is a recruiting one going on as well. So the idea here was that I felt managers who are the ones talking to all of our employees sometimes just don't have the vocabulary they may need to have a conversation about something like performance and potential, which we call succession planning, or the avenue or path to succession planning. And so my thought was, could AI help with the creation of tools for managers to use to have a conversation with their employee about how they're doing, perhaps what their potential is. So are they on a path to a bigger job, better job, different job, either within that department or in another department? And could the AI tool use data inputs to plot, perhaps algorithmically, where an employee might be on the map of potential and performance? But not just that, then giving the manager tools to say, okay, so I've looked at the inputs that we took. We took some of your emails, we got input from your project teammates, we got inputs from other leaders you've worked with, whatever data we can get our hands on that would be appropriate to use, and say, based on this, we've determined you to be on this particular place in what we call the 9 box. Then the manager gets the talking points about the reason we did that is because of this thing, because that's usually the missing piece. The manager can pinpoint you, but then when the employee starts to ask questions, the manager might be like, well, and it gets really subjective. And the hope is that the AI can provide objective assessments and then provide a tool for the manager to talk to the employee. But not just that, then we could use the AI to look across the learning assets that we have, either in our LinkedIn Learning library or our university learning assets, and say, okay, so you're at this point, you want to advance. We've determined that some of the skills that might be missing, or there are gaps, or where you need to develop, could be in these areas, and here is a pathway mapped to the learning assets the university has for you to be able to then have that ability to fill in the gaps. So employee gets this conversation, right? Manager gets the script, employee gets the results of that, has a productive, we hope, conversation, and then the employee can go off and actually start to fill in the gaps on the roadmap that's been provided. So that's what we're trying to do in the experiment.
Wow, that's pretty cool. There's a lot to that, right?
Yes, and what I think is interesting about using it as a capstone project in a leadership development program is that, first of all, I don't have to think up all the answers to all those hard questions.
Yep.
I get to use really smart people to do that. People who aren't necessarily versed in HR, so that they can take a completely sort of broad view of what it means to think about these things, and they can do research. I've been providing them thought leadership articles to help them along the path. But then also, I've asked them at the same time that they're doing the project, is to imagine filming a documentary of them doing the project, so that we can actually learn from them how they struggle with some of the problems they might encounter along the way. For example, how do you adjust for bias? What about gaps in the data? What about this? Or how did you come up with how did you reckon with legal concerns? Because I think that helping others learn how to consider the problems that are inherent in AI is also as important as actually coming up with the outcome of the project.
Yeah. Well, that presumably would filter into other AI projects like the succession planning project or,
yes.
or the recruitment project.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So how far along are you with this? Have you got to a point where you can begin to see the results at this point?
Yes. So the Capstone project will be presented to me in 2 months.
Okay.
So the team has been working, they take the summer off. They started in March. So I sort of charged them with the task in March, give them a lot of sort of primers and, like I said, thought articles and webinars and YouTube videos, anything they wanted to learn about, and then they're going to come to me in 2 months, and I'll see what they came up with.
Interesting. What have been the roadblocks that you've seen so far that they've brought to you?
Understanding HR concepts, right? So they aren't HR professionals. So when I talk about a 9 block, you're like, what the heck is that? So helping them understand sort of what we're talking about, but also challenging them to say, if you don't understand it, then put it in a way that is understandable by lay people or managers, right? Because I don't want them to use the HR jargon that sort of we sometimes fall into the trap of using. I want them to be able to explain that. So that's one of the things. The other one was the sort of, what about the data concerns? Could we mine people's emails? What about Slack? We use Slack as our sort of, form of communication. So can we mine all these data points without violating privacy concerns? And I said, well, that's a legitimate roadblock. So how would you normally solve, if you're presented with a roadblock in any project you're working on, how would you solve for that? So I really want to see how they're going to handle these things.
Yeah, no, the other thing that sort of springs to mind is things like biases, right? You mentioned that before, potential biases. Humans are, of course, inherently biased, and for humans creating the AI, that's going to potentially seep into that. How do you address that or create limitations?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see how the team handles that problem, right? But one of the things that we talked about, for example, is if you know that I'm going to be using this algorithm to sort of plot your performance and your potential, and I'm going to base it on peer reviews or comments that your project managers on your projects might make, you might likely want to go out there and influence what those comments could be like, right? So, you could influence through bias to feed the data that then is showing up sort of not objective. And then there could just be bias on the part of whatever the learning of the large language model is that says, when I read these words, I'm going to be biased to make this judgment. And then how do we plan, how do we sort of objectify that rather than make it subjective?
Yeah, it's a tricky problem.
It's a tricky problem.
But I suppose it's inherent in the process you're trying to do anyway, right? If humans are doing this now, poorly as they might be doing it, then that's still there. So it's really the same problem.
Yes, and one hopes, right, that if we have a more automated way of doing this with a more objective rubric or algorithm, that we can make it better over time, right? And we'll also have data about how it's being used and what are the outcomes that are being shown.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Based on what you've learned firsthand, what are 1 or 2 bits of advice you would offer any peers who are beginning, any sort of AI HR journeys?
Yes. Well, first of all, do it, right? ASU, where I work, is lucky that we signed an agreement with OpenAI to have our own private label instance of ChatGPT. So our data is not going out into the web, right? So you got to watch the data concerns, right? Those are important. But once you've got that set up, just go and try it. Now, what I've done before we had that private label ChatGPT is I would ask questions, but use anonymous words, right? Don't say ASU, say an organization, right? And so you can develop your prompts in ways that don't necessarily give it all away. Having the private label makes it a little bit easier, I will admit that. But find out what your limitations are, what the possibilities are, but just go and try things. And also think carefully about prompts, because I asked a question about, hey, I've got to give some advice to someone about coaching. And I, of course, meant executive coaching. ChatGPT's response to me was all about sports coaching. Right, so okay, so I need to change my input, right? So don't get frustrated that you think you're getting the wrong answer. It's actually, the answer is only as good as the prompt that goes into it. So I think learning how to develop those prompts and not getting frustrated about them.
Again, that happens in human interactions all the time.
All the time. Language is communication. Very important.
Yes, absolutely. What's next for your organization as you continue down this path? The other use cases and priorities you see?
Well, we are fortunate in that we are implementing a new HR technology that is going to have a lot of AI natively embedded. So we're going to be able to rely on what some other vendors have already provided as we launch this new technology later this year to see what they're doing. But I watched a demo of it, for example, the last couple of days at a conference, and one of the questions was, hey, my paycheck is different than it was last time. So you can just have conversation with the tool, rather than even type anything or have to call my service center, you can just say, why is my paycheck different? And then it will figure out some of the possibilities. In this case, there was a one-time bonus payment made, right? But just that the machine can tell you that without you having to type an email to somebody or call somebody or develop a ticket with a help call center, right, is already adding value in that you're being able to get direct access to information that answers your question.
Yeah, and you start to play that forward, and you think, people obviously worry about losing jobs in AI, but you start to think, well, what does that mean for your team? Your team are now able to free up and spend time on important strategic stuff and not time on answering important questions to employees. But at the end of the day, that's not really adding much value to the organization.
Yeah, and especially questions like that. Now, there are legitimate questions like, I want to plan for my retirement. What are the things that I can consider? Now, a machine can get you so far in that, but maybe you want to do conditional modeling about this or that, and sometimes you just want to talk to a human being to have that conversation. And my team should be doing that for you, but not just saying your pay increased by $700 because you got a bonus.
Yeah. Well, Michael, look, this sounds like you're doing some awesome stuff. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, it's a start, and we'll hope great things are to come.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.